For our final talk of the day, before we go to our panel, we will have Christian, who's a doctoral student at EPFL, and Shannon, who's a PhD student at ETH Zurich, talk about the new digital identities framework from the European Union and its the privacy risks that it poses to users.
Okay, thanks for sticking around. So I want to talk about the privacy harms of the European Digital Identity Framework with Shannon, and this is a joint work with these lovely folks, Mathilde Renal, Sylvain Châtel, Rita Stadler, Wouter Lux, and Camilla Troncoso. So you've had a bit of an overview of the Digital Identity Framework. Just to recap, if you just came in, this is kind of a global, like a EU push to have some form of digital identity. It's been kind of regulated since 2024. The goal is that by the end of this year, there will be 27 identity wallets authenticated, potentially up to 450 million Europeans for all kinds of use cases. So more concretely, there are three types of parties in the EUIDF. There are users who kind of have a wallet. You can think of this as an app on your phone. There are issuers. These might be governments, educational institutions, financial institutions, any kind of big thing or institution that knows something about you as a user might be an issuer. And then on the other hand, there are so-called wallet-relying parties that can ask for attributes. So these might be providers of online content that might be age-gated, or social media providers, law enforcement, pharmacies, travel operators, hotels, etc. And with your wallet, the long-term goal of the EUIDF is that you can go to an issuer and request attributes about yourself, like your date of birth, identity, travel passes, diplomas, credentials, and get those issued to you, and they are stored securely in your wallet. And then when you try to access a service, you can go to a wallet-relying party. They will request attributes from you, like maybe a subset of attributes or some function of attributes, and then you can show those securely or refuse to show those attributes, and then you probably get a refused service. And then that's kind of the way you mediate and show those attributes to access services. There are some discussion of use cases that the EU kind of envisions for this wallet. So first, it will be only identity to kind of authenticate towards your government. The long-term plan is to have a subset of these implemented, payments, showing professional credentials, buying SIM cards, opening bank accounts, accessing public services, showing a driver's license, diplomas, benefits, prescriptions, tickets, contracts, and so on. So this is really kind of encompassing a lot of attributes about yourself in your wallet that you can then show to various parties to facilitate your life, both kind of online, and some of those, as you see, also kind of physically when you're kind of going to a counter and trying to assert things about yourself. Now, for a bit of the history of privacy in the EUIDF, so there's been kind of a lot of involvement from civil society and also from academics, many of them are in this room, on how can we make this thing more private. And this has resulted in security and privacy being kind of embedded both in the regulation and partly in some of the kind of implementation decisions that are still ongoing. So you've seen the slides before, the EU digital wallet must be privacy preserving by default, must allow for a lot of zero knowledge proofs. For example, these are being discussed. Now the question that we ask in this work is to take a step back and to ask, okay, are privacy enhancing technologies, specifically zero knowledge proofs, anonymous credentials, an appropriate answer for those concerns about the harms that this EU digital identity framework will put into the world by existing? So I know this is the cryptographic applications workshops. There's not going to be any crypto in this talk. There's going to be a lot of applications. There's going to be crypto tools that we apply to try and find some answers to these questions. But we'll not touch any of the zero knowledge kind of constructions or anything. So if we try to reason kind of more formally about do pets actually help and how far do they help in this use case, we need to kind of get a formal grasp of this object that we're trying to talk about, of this EDIDF thing. The closest spec that we have is this long list of EU regulations, implementing decisions, technical frameworks that kind of say what this is supposed to be. And we have to kind of make sense of this. And as cryptographers, a very natural tool that we can use is ideal functionalities, right? So we use these tools. So we don't use any of the kind of UC framework of ideal functionalities. We just use the syntax to define what are parties, how do they interact, what is the interface, what is the kind of intended behavior, when is this correct? So I'll just quickly walk you through this. You don't have to read any of this. We have some parties. We have issuers, users, and relying parties. In our modeling, they interact with this functionality, which is going to keep state and keep everyone kind of honest. The first phase is a registration phase. So wallet relying party are supposed to register with, say, a national registry where they put some information about themselves, like an address or like a national number. They're supposed to also register presentation requests through attributes that they require, that we intend to request from people, and the intended use of those presentations. And these are kind of stored in some registry. They can be updated, removed at will. Then during issuance, a user will go to an issuer and will request attributes. And the issuer will then kind of check if it can issue these attributes, potentially issue those to the wallet, and, for example, also give a disclosure policy. So this is a policy that says, I am giving you, for example, your date of birth, and I am advising you to only disclose your date of birth to this set of relying parties, but not to these other ones. And you can, these predicates can be kind of embedded into the wallet as well. And formally, we store all of this attribute and policy in the functionality, and it's going to be kind of keeping track of all that global state. And then when a user tries to access a service, it will kind of ask the relying party. The relying party will answer and say, oh, I need to see these attributes of yours. It might also disclose some information about itself and say, I am this relying party. I was registered with this number. This is my official company name. It might also show maybe the intended use that it requests these attributes for. And then the user will check some of these fields, or has the ability to check some of these fields. So you can check the intended use. You can try and evaluate its policy and decide whether this policy advises the user to disclose the attributes. It can maybe look up some information about the relying party in some national registry. And then based on all of these things, it can decide whether it wants to consent to disclosing the attributes or not. And you can also disclose, you can request multiple attributes. You can request, for example, a minimal set of attributes for some functionality, and then in a second pass, request for more attributes for advanced functionality, and then even more, maybe to sell ads to users. And it's kind of very interactive flow to do disclosure. And then if the user consents, in the functionality, we just kind of load the attributes, potentially do selective disclosure, and reveal those to the relying party. So that's kind of the core EUDIF functionality, which is kind of broader than just credentials and has these kind of other things that are moving around it. And here again, we can use this kind of nice formalism that we have to define all the use cases using this core functionality. So you can think of all of the use cases as being ideal functionalities in the hybrid model. So we don't do any UC composition theorem or anything, but you can kind of see, for example, mobile driving license use cases as just querying the interfaces of the EUIDF with a specific set of attributes, a specific disclosure policy, a specific request of presentation. So that's kind of the modeling, and then Sean's going to talk about the harms of the EUIDF.
Okay, so coming back to what are the harms of the EUDIF, we have this big ideal functionality, but it's sort of hard to reason directly from this about its resulting harms because it's too abstract in a sense. We can model things like, okay, the user reveals some function of some attribute to a relying party, but without knowing what these things exactly are, it's difficult to say exactly what the resulting harms might be. And so what we do instead is we'll focus on some concrete use cases. And I'll start with age verification. Age verification has been proposed in a number of jurisdictions, and we already, the idea here is that some age-restricted online service will request verification that a user is above or below some age threshold. And with the EUDIF, the user can then use their wallet to generate a proof of some required age threshold and send this proof to the service. And then upon acceptance, they will provide the user with access to the content. Now, we've already seen from a number of articles and reports and papers and open letters some information about the potential harms of things like age verification in the context of social media or instant messaging services. So for example, some of you might have seen the open letter by scientists and researchers calling for a moratorium on age assurance technologies, or maybe you even signed it yourself. And so from these, we can sort of collect potential harms that might result from this concrete use case. But what we want to do in order to understand the potential role of privacy technologies is to relate this somehow to the system components. So system components are requirements that the system imposes on different entities or information leakage from the system. And these we can extract from our ideal functionality, but also from the digital context of the EUDIF, so the fact that it's being deployed, for example, across the internet for age verification for online services. And we can also take system components from concrete implementations. And here we'll start with a naive implementation, where we consider like the trivial case where a user will reveal their complete identity to every relying party upon each presentation. And I'll revisit a bit later on some non-trivial implementations. Okay, so now we have a set of harms and we have a set of system components, and we want to understand how these relate with each other. So I'll start with discrimination as an example. And discrimination here involves entrenching inequality or disadvantaging certain people based on their attributes. And of course, discrimination is sort of inherent to the use case. The goal of the system is that the service provider should be able to restrict content based on users' ages. But while this service provider restricting content can occur for legitimate purposes, like managing access to adult materials, this information can also be used for discriminatory services like discriminatory pricing or targeted advertising. So with this understanding, we can extract certain capabilities that enable the resulting harm. And then from here, we can observe that different system components combine to enable these capabilities that in turn result in the harm. And this gives us a variety of pathways from the system components to the harm that combine to form what we'll call a harm tree. Okay, so the last step in our harm tree here is that we want to identify the origin of these different system components. So recall that these system components came from a variety of different cases. In blue, we have components that stem from the digital context, so this being deployed in an online scenario. In red, we have components that stem from the concrete implementation. So here we have this naive implementation where the user would reveal their identity upon each presentation. So here we have a persistent identifier. And then the black components correspond to system components that stem from the functionality itself. So looking at this, we can see that a variety of different components combine to enable certain capabilities like profiling. So online metadata might include things like cookies or fingerprinting or tracking advertising IDs that follow users around. That can be used to enable profiling. And then the naive implementation also introduces this persistent identifier that can make profiling even easier. Okay, so understanding this harm tree, what we can observe is that the red paths, those corresponding to the concrete implementation, are the only paths that can be addressed by privacy-enhancing technologies. So for example, by using anonymous credentials, you can make this persistent identifier path go away. And this in turn makes profiling more difficult, but it does not remove the other paths in the tree. All right, so we can repeat this process and create many different harm trees for the harms that we've identified. And this gives us a better viewpoint to understand the role of privacy-enhancing technologies in preventing these harms. And what we find is that there are relatively few red paths where these privacy-enhancing technologies can eliminate them. All of these black and blue paths, they're inherent to its functionality and its digital context, so they can't be eliminated by privacy-enhancing technologies. Pets can still be useful for making certain capabilities more difficult, like tracking and profiling, and therefore making it more difficult to attain a certain harm, but they cannot eliminate the paths entirely. Okay, so this was for one specific use case of age verification. I'd like to briefly touch on another one, which is mobile driving licenses. So these are effectively a digitized version of a driving license that can be used to prove certain driving rights or present identity information. So for example, a car rental service might request some driving license information from a user when they're booking a car rental online. They can use their wallet to upload their driving rights information as well as their identity. And then once they go in person, the clerk can check the user's wallet information and verify their identity in person, and then give them access to the car. And then we can repeat this whole process of drawing our harm trees. And we end up with a lot of trees that look very similar to the age verification use case. So for example, we have the discrimination one here. And the difference is that all of our red paths go away. Because in this case, the user is revealing their identity by definition of the use case. They have to provide their identity information. And what this tells us is that pets cannot eliminate harms in identity use cases. And this is maybe obvious that the privacy properties that you get from things like anonymous credentials are not going to help you in the context of identity use cases. But if we go back to the list of proposed use cases for the EU DIF, well, some of them are not yet fully specified, but likely to require identity, like buying a SIM card or opening bank accounts. And a lot of the others already require identity information. And so the amount of use cases that fall into the same bucket as age verification, where it does make sense to use things like anonymous credentials and zero knowledge proof to have these privacy properties, are relatively few in the context of what they've specified. Okay, so the last thing I want to touch on is deployment requirements, because I talked mostly about this naive implementation where the user just presents their identity at every presentation. But in practice, when we deploy a system, there are many deployment requirements that increase the complexity of the system. So for example, in the previous talk, we already heard that the digital context of the system introduces a requirement that the wallet is stored and managed on a physical device. And much of the security of the use cases rely on users not being able to share credentials between devices, and so we need something like device binding to prevent this. But as we've seen, this introduces several technical requirements on things like the hardware of the user's phone. And not only this, but it creates sort of a one person, one device ownership model, which doesn't necessarily map to scenarios where people have multiple devices or people might share a single device. And so this can potentially increase the risk of structural exclusion. Next, Christian talked a little bit about these relying parties registering their information, registering the things that they'd like to request from different users, so that a user, when they go to present, can check that a relying party is registered, and they can check some policy information. But all of these sort of additional requirements within the system basically create more information flow to different parties, which might potentially introduce new red paths or new system components that might create new pathways to harm. On the other hand, there is some opportunity here for people to develop new privacy-enhancing technologies to limit the risks that are introduced by these new flows. Okay, I will hand back to Christian.
So Sharon talked about those kind of fundamental harm enabling capabilities when we have this functionality, right? So we showed you some of these trees, and we say, okay, the black paths are kind of inherent. And now the question is, okay, how can we kind of more formally argue this statement that, you know, pets cannot eliminate harms, for example, in identity use cases? How can we make this argument more formal? Because these trees are kind of derived from use cases. How can we kind of be more assured of this? And I promised you some crypto tools. And before this, we focus on 3 specific capabilities that we find over and over again in our trees, namely distinguishing between different classes of users, trackability across presentations, and inference of attributes about users. And these kind of lead to most of the harms that we see from the use cases. So I promised you some crypto tools. So the way that we kind of try and investigate those to formalize what these capabilities are is through cryptographic games. So there's kind of a framework that we can somehow use that defines games against the ideal functionality. So we have an adversary that plays, interacts with the functionality itself, and with a challenger that can maybe program some of the functionality inputs, outputs. And the challenger also defines a winning condition. In particular, we say that, you know, if the adversary wins, then, you know, we should encode the fact that when the adversary wins, it is able to achieve this harm-enabling capability. And because the functionality is kind of written and designed regardless of any crypto that you'll throw at the problem, it really encodes the system working as it is intended, as it is regulated and enshrined in the regulation with the best possible leakage. Like, there's no leakage that we can remove without breaking the system. And so this 2 things combined say that the adversary winning, achieving this capability actually is inherent in the functionality you want to have. So for the first one, the kind of distinguishing tracking is a kind of very closely related notion. I like to think as distinguishing as being kind of the an analog of zero knowledge, and trackability being an analog of unlinkability in earnest credentials. So there's kind of a more repeated observations flavor to it. But inherently, credentials, their entire purpose is to distinguish between users who have different values of credentials, either kind of a binary threshold like age verification, or kind of different values of attributes. It's kind of the reason why we use attributes is, for example, to do authentication, and you want to distinguish between people who are authorized and people who aren't authorized. And then through our modeling, we also find there's kind of slightly more subtle ways to distinguish between users, right? So the kind of attributes itself is kind of what you get from the credentials, but in this EU-IDF context, there are other things as well around the credential. For example, the fact that you consented to some of or all of the presentation requests, the fact that your policy evaluated you certain decisions, also allows you to distinguish between users in a way that's kind of, not dependent on the attribute itself, but simply, from what you were issued, for example, in the policy case. And so what we're saying really is that if you want to limit the distinguishing power of your adversary, of malicious relying parties, for example, the only way to do this is by modifying the functionality itself. So either you have to restrict issuers, so there's only kind of fewer of them, or they can only issue certain things, or you restrict the relying parties, so not everyone can ask for your identity, and that has to be kind of enshrined in the law and efficiently checked throughout the EU. Or you limit the presentations, right? So you can only present certain attributes of yourself and not kind of anything that's in your wallet in general. And probably you need a combination of these three restrictions to really kind of nail down something that you can bound and say, okay, you can distinguish up to this much, and we're, as a society, fine with the harms that this creates. And then distinguishing is kind of a one-shot thing. You see kind of a user's attributes, and you can distinguish between classes. You can also, consider the case where relying parties can observe multiple presentations. Is actually kind of an inherent thing also in the EU-IDF, which envisions kind of super relying parties, because many relying parties will not have the capacity to implement all these verification steps themselves. So they might defer the verification to some other parties that will do this on their behalf. You might also consider the fact where, where an issuer and a relying party may collude, for example, and then they may be able to infer more information about users because they have access to some kind of information that was present at issuance. And for trackability, the way to limit trackability is, well, first you need to limit distinguishing, because if we can distinguish, this helps in tracking. But additionally, across kind of the lifetime of a user's wallet, you also need to enforce kind of bounded leakage. So something like k-anonymity would be a start, so that among all your presentations, there kind of is an anonymity set that is large enough. We know k-anonymity is not enough in practice, so you would need some kind of L-diversity or T-closeness. You really have to kind of see the history of all the presentations of the users and kind of ensure that they're kind of smoothly distributed against the entire EU population. And this is a very big kind of open problem to how to do this efficiently. Privacy people have been working on this for decades. It's very hard, a priori to decide which attributes you can reveal and still not violate any of these properties here. Moving on to inference, the workflow of the IDF is that you, as a user, will reveal some attributes to the adversary. That's kind of the point, right? You want to do presentations. So, in crypto land, we say this is a trivial win. Like, this is not something you can protect. You can throw all the crypto you want. This is never going to be kind of removed from the interface. The insight here is that trivial wins at the crypto level can still translate to harms on the societal level, on the systems level. So we cannot exclude those from our modeling when we think about the whole system. So I saw this very nice thing from Anya, right? So there are kind of two extremes in the digital identity space. You can do kind of single bit disclosure about yourself. Think of it as age verification, where the identity set is kind of as big as it can be, and you don't really get a lot of kind of security or authentication, let's say. On the other hand, you have things like full authentication. When you interact with your government, you're revealing your full identity. They know who you are. There's no expectation of privacy. There's no privacy you can really achieve, but you have a lot of kind of authenticated connection with them. And in between these two extremes, that's where some of the use case sits. The current use case that you proposes are more on the kind of identity, like a spectrum, end of a spectrum. The issue here is that, okay, we know how the trivial win looks like and what the harms are at these two extremes, right? For single bit disclosure, probably you can't do too many harms. At the kind of identity disclosure, you can do some harms, but you can maybe rely on some, kind of the issuers being kind of established parties that are probably honest, and the relying parties also kind of being kind of trusted. In between, it's very unclear where the inference threshold should lie and like when inference would lead to harm. And to kind of hammer this point home, again, we can have the kind of a single view of a single disclosure. Here, I should also note that the function, or like the amount of attributes that you disclose, or the function of attributes, is controlled by the relying party. It's adversary controlled. Essentially, in crypto speak, this is an adversary controlled input. So there is a lot of flexibility to kind of play with this and try and infer as much as possible from the user. You can also do many times this kind of process as an adversary, and you can also do this adaptively, right? You can request some attributes and then maybe trying to infer more about the user, request some other attributes that are maybe kind of orthogonal and kind of shatter the anonymity space a bit more. So the takeaway is that in UIDF, an adversarial RP or an adversary in general, the kind of point is that they can perform a lot of inference about users' attributes, and limiting function creep or over-identification or over-inference means that you really have to restrict a priori which attributes can be issued or requested. And I'll let Shannon do the takeaways.
Okay, so to conclude, privacy-enhancing technologies are necessary, but certainly not sufficient to reduce the harms from digital identity frameworks. And privacy properties don't really compose very well. Lots of these harms and capabilities and leakage, they arise when we do the systems level analysis, as opposed to a primitive level analysis. So the system design itself can make a lot of the privacy claims at the primitive level vacuous. And some of these harms and capabilities are fundamental to the functionality. So in the end, only policy and regulation are really the tools that can help us to reduce these harms. All that to say is that we should be very careful in the messaging that we attach to our work on privacy-enhancing technologies so that we're not misleading users who might potentially use our work. But we still have some positive things to say in the context of digital identity frameworks. Using pets is certainly much better than not using pets. And anonymous credentials have value in digital identity frameworks beyond their privacy properties. They have a lot of security properties that also bring value. And there's still plenty of opportunity for pets development in this space. And with that, we'll take questions.
Thanks for the talk. Great. We have time for some questions while we also get ready then for the panel. Any questions from the audience? Otherwise, I have a question. So I thought it was really interesting how you divided in these harms trees into the 3 categories, and you looked at how pets can help with the red ones. But I was wondering if you also, as part of this analysis, thought about whether or not we should be developing digital identities to begin with. That is, if you remove the blue parts that were from the fact that they're online or digital, does that remove some of the harms? Are there inherent harms from making it digital that could be avoided by sticking to the systems that we have now?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly introduces new pathways, like digitization of your records might make them easier to share or search upon, and this kind of thing that might ultimately increase things like cybersecurity harms, depending on how things are implemented. But we sort of took because we took a harms-focused analysis, we were not really looking at the benefits either. And there are also benefits to digital identities over just having physical identities. So yes, but also maybe you still want it.
Thanks. Other questions?
So you mentioned policy as a main tool or only tool to reduce harm. Do you have example of policies you would recommend and maybe how to enforce them?
Sure. So for example, the one thing that's interesting in the current EID proposal is that there's this registration phase where relying parties have to register their name and what they intend to request. But when they do the presentations, as a user, you can still consent to revealing attributes that the RP hasn't registered. You can kind of override this as a decision. So there might be applications, for example, wallets implementations that can just kind of override user consent, or maybe people click the wrong button and they reveal what they didn't want. The same for the policy that issuer sets for you. If your government says, please don't reveal your ID number to any relying party beyond your government, for example, as a user, you can still override this and kind of decide to still give your identity to a lot of people by mistake or on purpose. So that would be one avenue, for example, where you can restrict the purpose of the EID to what the issuer intends, for example, or what at least the relying party kind of intends to query, so you can at least know what kind of things they request and what kind of intended use they claim to have.
All right, let's thank Shannon and Christian again.